Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of The Invisible Men. My name is Ian Rowe, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and also the founder of Vertex Partnership Academies, a virtues-based international baccalaureate public charter high school in the Soundview section of the Bronx.
I'm Nique Fazers, a member of the Leadership Network at AEI and an adjunct professor at Rice Business School and the WashU Olin Business School.
Nique, always great to see you. And as our viewers know, we love to feature amazing Black men whose ideas are so powerful and influential and should have more of a platform because it could really advance the interests not only of the Black community, but of all Americans, of how to lead self-determined lives of meaning and purpose. And today we have as a guest, certainly one of my heroes intellectually, as a person, as someone who's willing to accept and really embrace and tolerate ideas that he may not agree with, but really grapple with them, and accept nuance and potentially change his mind. And we're speaking of the great Glenn Loury, who is our guest today for The Invisible Men. Glenn, great to see you.
Thank you so much, Ian. I appreciate it. I'm flattered. Nique, very good to see you again. Good to be back with Invisible Men.
Yes, it is true.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Glenn was actually one of our first guests on The Invisible when we first launched this, when, post George Floyd and the world was going crazy. And once again, this narrative of the Black man as an endangered species was rife. And we had Glenn on. And Glenn, you shared some really powerful wisdom, as you will hear. So thank you for coming back.
My pleasure.
Yes. And, our audience you're the Merton P. Stoltz Professor of Social Sciences at Brown University, author, economist, professor, protagonist, antagonist, but someone who's not fearful, which is probably your greatest asset, where evidence-based opinion and dialogue is what matters most. And so we're looking forward to our conversation with you. But we always like to start, before you became the Glenn Loury that so many of us know, and when you were growing up in Chicago or whatever period, when did you realize that race was a thing? That, that skin color actually meant something?
Oh, that's a good question. I did grow up in Chicago on the South Side in the 1950s and 60s. And I'm inclined to answer you with an anecdote about riding my bike west of State Street and 79th in Chicago. Now, if you go there today, it's an all-Black neighborhood as far as the eye can see in almost any direction from that corner.
Wow.
But when I was 10 years old in 1958, it was basically a working-class Polish and Irish neighborhood to the west of State Street, and it was a Black neighborhood to the east of State Street up there by 79th on the south side. And I rode my bike, kind of innocently across the line, and ended up getting chased with these guys throwing rocks and stuff at me, telling me, Niger, get yourself back where you belong. And I went and asked my mother about what was going on. She said, don't you have better sense than to ride your bike over there? Because that was the white neighborhood, and, you weren't supposed to ride your bike over there. You did so at your peril. That kind of thing. I remember being a young high school student. I was 12 years old when I started high school. And you go to the football games, and there was the public league, public schools, football championship, and there was the Catholic schools, because there was a lot of Catholic schools, high schools, secondary schools in Chicago in those years. And the Catholic League would have a champion, the Public League would have a champion, and then they'd have like the Super Bowl of high school football. It would take place on Soldiers Field, which is the big football field, has been for a long time in Chicago. And there would always be a fight after the game. You went to the game planning your escape route. You know what I'm saying? How do I get back to the Chicago Transit Authority station in case there's, fisticuffs that breaks out? And those fights often fell along a racial line because the Catholic schools were mostly white, and the championship football teams in the public schools were often from the black schools, and you had a thing like that. So growing up, I mean, I'm taking a long time to say, being black in the 50s and 60s in Chicago, it was hard not to notice where the lines were and whose side you were on and stuff like that. Now, in addition to that, I came from a family which had firebrands. Mm-hmm. It had my Uncle Alfred, who I talk about in my memoir, was one of these guys who would go out to Washington Park and stand up on a soapbox and start preaching about the white man, and about the devil. I mean, he was not a Muslim because he was too orthodox to be a conventional black Muslim follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and whatnot. He was one of these black Hebrew guys. I hope not to offend anybody by just observing.
Just an observation
that he was, one of these guys. So he had a very heavily racialized reading of the Old Testament of the Bible. Let me put it that way, and that was a part of the kind of milieu, that was a part of the mix. So I've been knowing that I'm a black guy almost from day one, and that's been a part of my calculation ever since.
When you were riding that bike, did you ever make any friends with any of those white Polish kids?
No, not until I got to Illinois Institute of Technology as a 17-year-old freshman in the engineering school, where a lot of the working class ethnic kids who were very smart, carried their slide rules, did their calculus, had been at Lane Tech or at Tilden Tech. These were the technical high schools, public high schools in Chicago. And they were Irish ethnic or Polish ethnic or Italian ethnic or Jewish ethnic. And, they were okay. A lot of those guys, I got to know them better in that setting than I did. My high school was pretty segregated. It wasn't all black. It was like 30% white. But I really started making friends across the racial line when I got to college.
Glenn, I was just going to comment that you shared another little nugget about your early life that you didn't share in the first podcast, which was the started high school at 12. Because for those that haven't watched the first episode with Dr. Loury, he walks us through in great detail his transition, from working in the printing press and ending up at Northwestern Mathematics and then MIT. And I'm sure for many of our audience, like, how did he make that transition? And he was a father and a husband at that time. How did he make that transition? But that little nugget of starting high school at 12 obviously spoke to the incredible intellectual curiosity and talents of young Glenn Loury, which I think can't be missed in that overall story. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Nique. I first time in college, I was 16 when I graduated high school. And, I was young and foolish and frustrated because I was still a virgin and, I hadn't, really done a lot of the things that the kids who were my classmates, but who were a year and a half, 2 years older than me had done. And so I kind of messed up and didn't go to class and hung out and messed around, got my girlfriend pregnant and stuff like that, and ended up dropping out of college. And as I explained at greater length in the previous interview that I did with you guys, and going to work in a printing plant and marrying the girl that I got pregnant and, starting a family and working full time, and made my way through a community college and a nice scholarship that Northwestern University offered me, doing double time, working full time with the family, but also going to classes at Northwestern, which was, top rate place. But I, thank God, had the gifts that allowed me with the determination and I messed up the first time in college. I wasn't going to mess up again. This was my chance. Northwestern was amazing. I was introduced to the world of ideas, philosophy, politics, economics, mathematics, German language, literature, history. It was like an education. And so I got on track, and, one thing led to another, and I ended up at MIT with a PhD at 27. So I was a college dropout at 18, and I was a PhD from MIT at 27 because I didn't have any time to waste. I was on a mission, and like I said, I had the skills, and thank God had the opportunities and the support of family and, whatnot.
As the great Don King often said, only in America. It's such a beautiful story.
Only in America.
But Dr. Loury, one of the events that I was at with you a couple of years ago, you delivered a lecture at the Old Parkland conference that I took detailed notes, and obviously the vast majority of our audience were not present. And I just thought that there'd be real value in kind of revisiting, because you were one of the keynote speakers, just revisiting some of the elements of your lecture. And I'm just going to throw out some of the themes that you presented. And the first one, I think it's appropriate post-election, and you talked a great deal about the lies about America. Can you give us a bit more about what those lies are and how they've taken hold in our country?
Yeah, I think I called that lecture, Why Does Racial Inequality Persist? Or words to that effect. And it was 2022, which is a couple of years after the summer of 2020. It was still, however, in a period that I think you would call racial reckoning and, anti-racist advocacy and rhetoric. And the idea of structural racism of America as a racist society, of Black people being without, they're trying to keep us away from the polls. They won't let us go to the schools. The wealth gap, there was, disparities, mass incarceration, racialized policing, there was this rhetoric. And I was trying to counter, to a certain degree, that rhetoric. And yeah, lies is a strong word, but, if you don't see that America is a great country, you tell your children that they are born on first base and they're never going to get anywhere. If you say that anti-Black racism is the main obstacle to African-American success in the country, you're lying to your people. And I was trying to say, it's a hard thing to say, really. And, my mouth is not a prayer book. I'm not sure I'm right. But I was basically of the conviction that the ball is in our court, speaking about Black people. And that the people who tell you that America is broke, that there's a insurmountable barrier to our participation, that they're out to get us, that the deck is stacked against us, they're wrong. And their error is substantial and it's consequential. And it leads to things like cities that are burning down and rioting people who think that violence, and it leads to telling our youth a story of disaffection and alienation and a failure to appreciate the inheritance. I at one point in that speech, and I'm sure you have other comments you want to make, so I won't try to give the whole speech here. But at one point I say something like, we African Americans, you got to take a look at it. We're the most powerful Black people on the planet. We're the wealthiest, best wired, most influential, greatest opportunity people of African descent, large population of African descent, ever to walk the planet. Is everything equal? No, it's not. You can do anything in this country. This is the message. Anything is possible in this great country. When people vote with their feet and move around the planet to try to find someplace to go, this is where they want to come. Again, is it perfect? No, it's not perfect. Can there be reforms? Yeah, there can be reforms, but basically, this is a pretty good deal we got here. And we need to grasp the net hole, seize the response, seize the opportunity, lean in to America. This is the kind of thing I was trying to say.
Wow.
And a couple more quotes. I'll just quote you. The greatest force for human liberty in the history of the world. The emancipation of 4 million people was a uniquely American and Western idea. It's so powerful and so underrepresented in the general narrative, especially to our young people.
Yeah, and I'm kind of pushing back against the 1619 Project spirit, that the country's real narrative is a narrative about slavery. And I'm an African American. I'm a descendant of African slaves, not only African slaves, but I'm substantial. My heritage is Black people. And I didn't want, in the spirit that I had just exemplified of saying this is a great country and we need to lean in, I didn't want to leave it at slavery. I want to say, yeah, slavery is a part of the story, but emancipation is also a part of the story. And I wanted to say this thing that, the Second Reconstruction, Lincoln, the Civil War, the post-war amendments that abolished slavery, that extended citizenship to African Americans and voting rights, revolutionary, was only possible within a legal / philosophical / moral universe that abhorred slavery and that affirmed the dignity of every human being. And while the United States was founded in a compromise on slavery, the institutional framework was laid down for the abolition of slavery. And that's the thing that's uniquely American. Slavery is not uniquely American. Slavery of one sort or another we've known since the beginning of time. But emancipation, the fact that you could have a movement that could last over generations, that could seep itself into the consciousness of the country, and that could provoke the abolition of this institution of chattel slavery, that is a uniquely American and a pretty much uniquely Western thing. I don't want to overstate this, because there's humanitarian sentiment and idea that you find in other cultures, but the Enlightenment, the birth of this great country in the 1770s and 80s, the ratification, the enactment of our Constitution, which laid down a legal framework. This is virtually unique in human history. We are the heirs of that, we African Americans. And I wanted to try to make that point.
Yeah. I mean, you speak so eloquently about the future of the Black community and whether or not it's determined by external forces that control our destiny or the internal factors and the responsibility we have. And I want to take you back to just something you just said about when you were growing up, and you said, I messed up. I messed up. You said it a couple times when you said you had a child. And what's, I guess, most powerful about that example is you got married. You got married. So this event happened and you didn't walk away. You said, you know what? Maybe this is the moment that I got to get my shit together, right? And you got married. And years later, Janet Yellen, did an analysis with her husband, George Akerlof, to try and understand why economic opportunity was depressed for so many people, why certain communities seemed to be entrenched in poverty. And her analysis was that based on things like abortion, the pill, very interesting. She said that the decline in what was this idea of what a shotgun wedding culture, where if someone got pregnant, there was still this belief like, okay, this happened, but we gotta take care of this baby. We gotta build a family now. The degradation of that culture. And I'm wondering what you think about it. So you say you messed up, but you made the decision to get married. And I wonder, does this fall into something you often talk about, which is what's in our control to do with our own people and our own decision making, and just connect those dots.
Well, it was a different time. It was 1967, 68, 69. My first wife, Charlene, mother of Lisa, who was born in 1967, and Tamara, who was born in 1968. And she and I did marry. And I mean, it never really occurred to me that we wouldn't. Uh, we had two kids together, and I was their father. She was their mother. We were in the Bethel church. There was Pastor Bob. There was my Auntie Lois. There was my mother. There was my father. There was her mother, Mrs. Teague, Mary Teague.
And she held you.
Lord,
she held you accountable.
Lord knows that she was a taskmaster, and we were young. We were very young. I was 18 when Lisa was born. Shar was 16, just turned 16 when Lisa was born. We were young. And I didn't have a job, and I didn't have any livelihood or whatnot. I eventually dropped out of college. I got a job. It just never occurred to me that we wouldn't marry. Now, I should acknowledge that I fathered a child out of wedlock in the context of that marriage, a child, Alden, who's a wonderful journalist in Chicago now, and my dear son, and the father of 3 of my 6 grandchildren. And I have a wonderful relationship with all of them. But it was a rocky road, and there were many years there where Alden and I didn't have much of a relationship at all. So my story, has various ups and downs and lefts and right. And I don't want to sound like being preachy or anything like that, but the commitment of marriage and the dedication to that family obviously were essential to the development of Lisa and Tamara, and were entirely in keeping with the ethos of our time. Terminating one of those pregnancies by what would have been illegal means at that time in the late 1960s in Illinois never occurred to us. I mean, okay, maybe the thought crossed one's mind, but it was not something that you were going to do. And that was that. So yeah, family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship.
That sounds pretty good.
Free. They'll follow that, and they'll set you free. And
that is the idea. Go ahead, Nique.
Dr. Loury, a question, and this is, recently we had a podcast with a gentleman that was maybe 40 years older than us, and that's not the case here. But I still very much view you as an elder and someone who's almost, I'm sitting at the knee listening to you. And so, 2 books. What 2 books had the greatest positive impact on your life?
Oh man. This is where you say something like the Bible and Shakespeare or something like that. And it's true that reading Shakespeare, Hamlet, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, Tempest, All's Well That Ends Well, Julius Caesar, man. I wrote a whole paper basically in my 40s. I wrote a paper based on the impact that the politics and personalities of that play Julius Caesar had on me. Anyway, so you say Shakespeare, you say the Bible, you say Homer or Thucydides or something like that, or Plato's Apology of Socrates or something like that, which I didn't read until I was out of college. I'll tell you, Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom had a huge impact on me when I saw, as a young, budding economist, the power of a libertarian kind of view about economics could have. The autobiography of Malcolm X had an impact on me, too, as a, wannabe radical leaning kind of Black intellectual in the late 60s and early 70s. So,
no, that's a wonderful list.
Okay.
And our viewers should know Glenn Loury is an author who our students read at Vertex Partnership Academies as part of our.
I'm so happy to hear.
Yeah, as part of and you're in good company. It's Thomas Sowell, Shelby Steele, Jason Riley, Thomas Chatterton Williams. Interesting. Coleman Hughes, that's among our literary works that our high school students are reading.
Well, I'm in very good company there. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll have to send you some of the essays that they've written after reading your book.
Wow.
Yes.
I'd be interested in seeing.
Yeah.
That.
So speaking of schooling, you often talk about these two frameworks: the development narrative, and I think the oppression narrative, or this idea.
I call it the bias narrative. The bias narrative and the development narrative. That's the language.
What's the difference between those two things?
Well, basically, it is how you account for disparity, whether or not you talk about it in terms of denied opportunity and bias, or you talk about it in terms of missed opportunity and development. Denied opportunity is a guy standing there in the door and he won't let you in. Missed opportunity is that you could have acquired the skills that would have made you a competitor and you would have gotten in the door, but you missed the opportunity and you didn't do that. Now, you're not on your own. I mean, if the schools fail you, that's not your fault. I know I'm talking to educators here, and, you know, a kid is not responsible for the fact that they didn't get taught well. But as a general rule, speaking, as it were, to the African-American community as an insider, I'm saying, you know, our story historically has largely been one of denied opportunities because of bias, because of racism, because of Jim Crow, discrimination. Couldn't vote, couldn't own property, didn't get compensated for your labor, etc. Got swindled out of your land, got sharecropped, bargained down to debt peonage. You know, that's a story about bias. Couldn't live in this neighborhood, couldn't shop in this store. No blacks need apply. You can look at employment advertising in the 1950s in major newspapers like the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune and so on. And they're very explicit, white only, you know, kind of thing like that. That was the norm for a substantial part of American history. Now, despite that fact of denied opportunity, as my friend Bob Woodson would be quick to say, African Americans achieved. They built businesses, they built farms and families, and saved and created a society apart that was more than just functional, and that had much to admire in it, including educating our own kids and perforce under a kind of segregated regime. Black excellence was not unknown. The story of the African American population post-emancipation in the last decades of the 19th century is a story of acquiring literacy, of acquiring land, of acquiring skills, of development. So it's not like development is foreign to us. But I wanted to draw a distinction between those two predispositions of narrative. The narrative that says the reason the jails are overflowing is because the cops have it in for us. It's because of racist laws. It's because of anti-Black structural racism. The reason that the test score gap is as big as it is, or that the achievement gap in various measures of educational attainment is what it is because of bias and denial of opportunity, exclusion, underfunded. They don't like us. They don't want us to succeed. And on my count, while that was a true characterization of the situation of African Americans for maybe much of the first century after emancipation, we're in the 21st century. The 21st century. That's a century and a half after the end of slavery. That's a long time. The world is completely different. The country is completely different. The game has changed. Nobody is waiting for us and nobody is coming to save us. The ball is in our court. The opportunity to develop is there. It's not a blockade of opportunity. It's a failure to realize the potential of opportunity. I wanted to say, now that's hard. Saying that is hard because it seems to be blaming the victim is what people will call it. And I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm just trying to be in touch with the reality of my condition. People won't like me saying this. It's obvious that the streets are paved with gold in this country. Look at what the immigrants of one stripe or another are doing with these opportunities. Oh, immigration is not the same thing as slavery. I know that. But you can't tell me there's not opportunity here when you see what these people are doing.
Right.
So if you think you're getting equality by adopting this pose, which many liberal whites want to respond to affirmatively, the pose is, I'm aggrieved, I've been wronged, you owe me, my hand is out, I'm angry, I'm mad, I'm alienated, I don't belong. Prove to me that you're a righteous person by being an anti-racist. If you think that's equality, when you don't have the capacity to generate your own wealth, when you don't own any businesses, when you're not taking care of your business, when you're not picking up the trash in front of your house, when you're not educating your kids, when the abortion rate in your community is through the roof because relationships are whack and people can't commit long enough to one another to be able to reproduce socially their own population into the next generation, and you're dependent upon the largesse and the beneficence and the pity of white people, you know, Malcolm X wouldn't have had it for a minute, and neither will I.
I love it.
You ain't lying.
You're not lying. You're not lying. So, but what you just said about, okay, even the immigrant thing, how do we develop within young Black, and by the way, again, this phenomenon is across, it's across race, but that mindset of this country is great, flaws and all, and I can do anything. How do you think, and this is the development narrative, how do we cultivate that within schooling, within parenting, within the church? How do we get more young people to realize, yes, I will face adversity, maybe my race or anything else, but I have that within me?
I don't know is my honest answer. I wish I did. I'm almost inclined to ask you, a successful educator, about what you do in your schools that allows you to be so successful. My guess is that kind of thing, that kind of pedagogy, or I could ask a pastor, Corey Brooks in Chicago, for example. I just named one. He's an African-American on the South Side with a congregation who's trying to make a difference in his community with some success. Yep. The rooftop pastor, they call him, because when he needs to raise money for a community center, he unfurls a tent in the middle of winter on top of his roof and says, I won't come down until I've raised my $10 million or whatever it is.
And he's raised about $40 million, right?
God bless him. Yeah, I mean, and I'm all for it. And I almost want to ask him, what do you preach? Because I think the answers and that kind of inspiration and that kind of example and that kind of education and teaching of, you know, responsible living. How do you live? You know, you don't come into the world knowing how to live. You have to be taught what is decent, what is dignified, what is responsible living. You have to have that exemplified for you by other people. And, you know, a good charter school, a powerful ministry, a program of mentorship, big brother, big sister, adoption, things of this kind. You know, these are, you know, things that come to mind as would be helpful. It would be great if the popular culture were on our side. If the rappers and, you know, the TV directors and producers and whatnot were, when I say on our side, I mean, took seriously the mission of education for uplift and decent living as a part of their cultural offerings. I mean, you know, I know that's, you know, from my lips to God's ears. I mean, that's wishful thinking, because the imperatives are the bottom line, and the bottom line is driven more by indecency and degradation and whatnot, you might say, than it is by affirmative and high-minded and visionary and whatnot.
I wonder why that is, because the last time a popular show on television celebrated, for example, a 50th wedding anniversary, was The Cosby Show.
Oh, I didn't know
About
that.
40 years ago. That's the last time any major show, this idea of celebrating a long, healthy, positive marriage with lots of grandchildren, this unit was The Cosby Show. And that was a wildly successful show. So maybe there is a way to sell wholesome.
Maybe. I hope you're right about that.
Dr. Loury, what's your take on the significant increase in Black men that voted Republican in the most recent election?
They didn't drink the Kool-Aid. They didn't buy the master narrative of the left. They identified to some degree with some of the principles and ideas that the Republicans convey, as well as perhaps to some degree with the personality of Donald J. Trump. I mean, I don't know. You would do better to ask somebody with some real data about opinions in the election to opine about this. This is just off the top of my head. But I think take the transgender debate. Where do you think most Black men, I haven't done the poll. Okay, this is just, I'll bet you that there are a lot of people biting their tongues who are very, very skeptical about, this is crazy, man. You don't know the difference between a man and a woman. This is just whack kind of thing. Now, them being Black, I don't know if that has a whole lot to do with it, although I suspect it does have something to do with it. This is some crazy, far left, far out, white liberal SHIT is what a lot of these guys are probably thinking. I think people underestimate, there are the kitchen table things. There's the inflation and whatnot and the economy and maybe a little bit of bristling at the COVID shutdowns and things like that. I don't know. The flow, unrestricted flow of relatively unskilled foreigners who come to this country without authorization and who disseminate themselves throughout the country and become competitors in the labor market and for public services and stuff like that. They tried for a long time to sell Black people the story that, it's people of color and it's all, anti people of color racism, that the immigration issue, the people are concerned about it. But I think on the ground in Los Angeles or Denver or Houston or Chicago or the Bronx or whatever, because every city is a border city now with transportation and whatnot, that a lot of people bristled at that. A lot of Black people, a lot of Black men, I think, bristled at that. I don't know if there isn't anything to, President Obama complained to Black men that they shouldn't let the hidden misogyny and anti-woman attitudes that they might be harboring keep them from doing the right thing by voting for Sister Kamala. I don't know how many people bought that whatsoever. They in the barbershop that I go to, they still don't know if Kamala Harris is Black. Again, please do not get mad at me. I'm just reporting to you what these dudes were saying. Okay.
Listen, Glenn, Janet Jackson wasn't so sure. I brought this up a couple episodes ago. She said, I'm not sure this woman is Black. So, yeah, I'm sure the barbershop had a similar tone and attitude.
Yeah, and maybe people voted without race as being the number one factor that was driving their decision making,
Yeah, maybe so. But I hesitate only because I don't want to tip my hand here too much. Could you forgive a red-blooded American male from having some positive reactions to the act, which is the Donald Trump show. I mean, you know, a lot of people just said, you know, there was a bro thing.
Well, the guy was
going on there.
And the guy almost got killed, too.
I mean, he gets up from getting shot with his fist up in the air, talking about fight. Or I can remember seeing something on social media. It was a photo of a black guy in the Atlanta suburbs with a poster. He was wearing it. NIGGERs for Trump. And then they started interviewing him. And he said, anybody who's been in the Fulton County lockup is a brother as far as I'm concerned.
Now, the truth is, I actually don't like that, but it is funny.
Yeah, it's funny. That's all I'm saying. It's funny. And no, blackness should not be identified with being locked up.
Right, exactly. All right.
But to some of these guys, it probably is in their minds a connection between the two.
One last political question for you, Dr. Loury. So if we move to the end of 2028, there's a lot of excitement in Washington. You know Washington well. You spent many hours, days, weeks there. What kind of impact do you think we'll see in 2028 for all, the Government Efficiency Office and a lot of the energy and initiatives that are being discussed, the shutting down of secretarial departments? Where do you think we land for, quote unquote, 4 years from now?
I don't know. Let's buckle up. It's going to be an interesting ride. I think one of the things that is interesting about the reemergence of Trump is that certain kinds of changes become possible, like the Department of Government Efficiency. This is Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. And everybody is, all the lefties in the mainstream media and the opinion press are dogging it. They're saying, it's, a billionaire is going to whatever. Man, having these guys run amok. You saw what they did on this budget, that they wouldn't let the Republicans pass in the House of Representatives. I mean, they're saying $27 trillion of debt is too much, and we're going to change the script here. They're saying 1,500 page pieces of legislation that are hundreds of billions of dollars of pork. That
you only get 1 day to read, by the way.
And nobody has read that thing. And they're saying we can't do business like this anymore. And that's a different kind of conversation to be coming out of the leadership of the executive branch. And I regard Trump's partnership with Elon Musk, making him a leader, Musk, in the executive branch of the U.S. government. That's just a different kind of conversation. I think stuff like reparations for slavery and defund the police and all this kind of crazy stuff. I'm sorry. I know that there are people who take those arguments seriously. I think they're just dead wrong. I could say why if you want me to. But even liberal Democrats are running away from that stuff because they realize that it's a losing hand. It is going to get 30% support at the polls. And that's just not enough to get anything done. And it can ruin your career getting identified with that kind of stuff. So I think that conversation changes. But there's also a lot that can go wrong. I mean, tariff threats as a negotiation strategy is one thing. Massive cross the board tariffs as a policy, I'm not so sure that that's a good idea. And there's a lot of stuff that's like that. These wars without end. Are we really going to have a different American footprint in the global political context? I don't know. The forces that are behind that are beyond my ken. They're very powerful forces. I'm not sure what one person can do. But the majority in the House is pretty thin. I mean, if you're going to have massive legislative initiatives, I'm not quite sure you can get them there. The filibuster lives on, and if you ask me, it's a good thing too. but that is a bar to just pushing anything through that you want.
I mean, one thing I hope, and this will be related to what I think has to be our final question, but one thing I hope 4 years from now, 8 years from now, is that there's just a different mindset that when problems emerge in a community, the first answer is that it's someone else's fault, or I need someone else to solve the problem, or it's the government, that there is a greater sense of self-reliance, our own community, our own families, our own faith-based organizations. I hope that all of these actions bring that sense more of agency, bring particularly to the rising generation. And that's, I want to ask you, as Nique and I started this journey together on the Invisible Men 30 years ago, when the Rodney King beatings occurred, and there were these riots after the acquittal of the police officers, and there was this narrative: if you're a Black man in this country, you don't have a future. The bias narrative, as you say. And there are a lot of kids, and we made a film 30 years ago called The Invisible Men, and we resurrected it a few years ago after George Floyd, because that same narrative started to develop. And we have this character, Daryl, 16-year-old kid who lives in forgotten USA, who is only hearing the narrative, the bias narrative. He's not hearing from Glenn Loury or Nique Fajors or Ian Rowe. And I'm just curious, if you had a Daryl in front of you, and he's trying to figure out his way in the world, what would you say to him?
It's showtime. You're going to have to get busy. If you're already busy, we're going to have to keep you busy. What's your plan? Not everybody's going to be a PhD from MIT, but everybody should have a plan. If it's vocational education, I'm behind that. I'm okay with that. Let's talk about how we're going to do that. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that flows from the mouth of God, or words to that effect. Forgive me if I misquote the scripture, but spirit is important. I agree with you, Ian. Family, religion, education, and entrepreneurship. Religion is important. I'm not asking you to believe the same God that I'm believing in. I'm asking you to see that there is more than what you can touch and what you can feel. There's more to the meaning of life than gratification of your senses. Yeah, it feels good. Man, think about having, making that kid was fun. Raising that kid is a 25-year project. You may think it's a bunch of BS sitting in the classroom and filling out these multiple choice quizzes and whatnot like that. But if you don't get an education at something, if you don't have something of value to offer to the world, you're always going to be walking around with your hand out or with your hand in somebody else's pocket. And neither one of those is a dignified way of living. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. I think that's Jordan Peterson. I don't mind quoting him. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Nobody is coming to save you. This kind of thing. This is me. I've already said this in earlier comments here in this interview, but man, nobody is coming to save you. The ball is in our court. Let's get busy. What's the plan? I'm prepared to help you. I'm prepared to back your play to the extent that makes sense. But what's the plan?
Right. That's a key point. You don't have to do this alone.
Right.
The ball is in our court. Love it. Glenn, as always, you brought the heat, you brought the wisdom, and just thank you. Thank you for everything. Thank you for everything. You are, I hope you realize how much of an inspiration, especially in the last few years. I mean, you've been incredible for a long time, but especially in the last few years, giving a lot of us the backbone and the confidence to weather, some heavy opposition ourselves, but you have led us through. So thank you.
I got something I want to tell you, but I don't want it to be on the recording.
Okay. All right. Well, then, Nique, I don't know if you have any parting words.
Ian, you said it well. Brother Loury, you are a national treasure. We're
Thank
so
you.
grateful that you continue to give so much of yourself to the country, because it is having a massive impact. So thank you as always. Pleasure to be in your presence again.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk with you guys, really. I like what you're doing. Keep it up.
Thank you. Well, that's thank you, our viewers, for watching this latest episode of The Invisible Men. If you'd like to see any of our 50-plus episodes, you can go to www.invisible.men. And with that, Dr. Glenn Loury, thank you. And to our audience, onward.